Next ballgame, little Black Friday action. This should be a good one. I'm talking about Tulane taking on Cincy, 12 o'clock Black Friday. Cincinnati's -2, totals 47. And as small as this number is, you still got to consider the fact that Cincinnati failed to cover in 6 out of their last 7 ball games. And one of those failures was an outright loss to UCF. So like I said, really short number here, but there's something to be said for their string of bad luck against the spread. Now, the Bearcats have done very little to establish the run game. They're actually in the bottom 25 in the country in home rushing. They're facing a Tulane squad who plays some really tough defense themselves. They're allowing fewer points per contest on the road than most teams in the country. They're also undefeated on the road this year, and they successfully covered the point spread in all of those victories. Dorian Williams, he leads the charge with 92 tackles on the year. When it comes to the injury report, Cameron Carroll is questionable for Tulane. Meanwhile, for Cincy, starting quarterback Ben Bryant and Chamon Mateer, they're listed as questionable for Cincy, so keep an eye on their status. Probably end up playing, but they're probably going to end up playing banged up. Now, weather-wise, possibly rainy with a slight breeze on Black Friday in Cincy. When it comes to the total, the Bearcats went 6-1 to the under in their last 7. Meanwhile, Tulane saw 3 out of their last 4 on the road stay under the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Tulane +2 under 47. Next matchup, it is going to be Baylor taking on Texas. Not on our big screen behind me, but that's going to be a 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. The Texas Longhorns are -9, totals 55. Now, the Longhorns did fail to cover in 3 out of their last 5, and for some reason, they have a tough time running the football at home. They're facing a Baylor team on the other side who covered in 6 out of their last 9, and they do a nice job slowing down the run on defense themselves. Al Walcott and Dylan Doyle, they've combined for nearly 140 tackles between the two of them. When it comes to the injury report, running back Tay McWilliams is questionable to play on Friday. Keep an eye on him. When it comes to the weather, chance of wind and rain by kickoff. So if you got action on this game, certainly take a look at the weather report. A lot of factors going into that contest if you're betting on it. Now, total-wise, the Longhorns are 5-1 at the under as the home team. Meanwhile, Baylor saw their last 2 straight stay under the total themselves. Unders against the likes of TCU and Kansas State. I'm going to lean toward Baylor +9, keeping this one close, under 55. Next matchup, Utah State taking on Boise State. 12 o'clock Eastern start time on the Smurf turf. Of course, they're out west, so that's an early morning start time for those guys. Now, Boise's -16, totals 53. And the Broncos, in my opinion, should steamroll these guys on Friday. They lost only 1 game this year at Albertson Stadium, and they're playing a very physical brand of football. Offensively, these guys are one of the better running teams in the country. Meanwhile, defensively, they arguably have one of the best secondaries in the game. They're actually leading the country right now in fewest passing yards allowed per game. J.L. Skinner and Rodney Robinson, they have 7 interceptions between the two of them. Meanwhile, Zeke Noah and Dimitri Washington, they've combined for nearly double-digit sacks together. Now, injury-wise, Jackson Cravens and Will Farron, they're both questionable for Boise. Meanwhile, for Utah State, quarterback Levi Williams and running back John Gentry are questionable for them. Of course, Logan Bonner banged up. So these guys really hurting at quarterback. Now, weather-wise, mostly sunny, but very cold by kickoff in the morning there in Boise. Should be about 27 degrees when they kick this one off. When it comes to the total, Boise could potentially put this one over themselves. They're also 4-1 at the over on the Smurf turf this year. Meanwhile, Utah State saw 4 out of their last 7 get over the line. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Boise State, -16 over 53. Next matchup, a little action on a Friday. I'm talking about Central Michigan at Eastern Michigan, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Central Michigan's -1, totals 53.5. Now, the Chippewas have actually done a nice job of throwing the football on the road this year. Carlos Carrier and Joel Wilson, they've combined for nearly 1,000 yards receiving together. And in these teams' last 10 head-to-head meetings, Central Michigan has gotten the W in 8 out of their last 10 games against the Eagles. And speaking of Eastern Michigan, They have a losing record at home, and they've actually been little threat throwing the football. These guys are in the bottom 15 in the country in home passing yards. And when it comes to defensive play, well, these guys have been brutal at slowing down the run at Rynerson Stadium. Very bad stopping the run at home. Now, injury-wise, cloudy and breezy at Eastern Michigan on Friday. And when it comes to the total, the Eagles saw overs this season against the likes of Akron, Western Michigan, and Buffalo. Meanwhile, the Chippewas, they saw overs in 3 out of their last 4. I'm going to lean towards Central Michigan, -1, over 53.5. All right, next ball game, some more MAC conference action. I'm talking about Toledo at Western Michigan, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Toledo's -7, totals 53. Now, the Rockets should have little issue moving the football in Western Michigan. Toledo's averaging 35 points a game, and they actually rank in the top 25 in points per contest. When it comes to defensive play, this Rockets secondary is limiting their competition to just 199 yards a game passing. Quinyon Mitchell, he has a team best 4 interceptions. Meanwhile, Jamal Hines and DeJuan Jackson, they've combined for 11 sacks between the two of them. Now, they're facing a Western Michigan team who's had a tough time getting the W at home. These guys are just 1-4 straight up at Waldo Stadium. And they successfully covered the point spread only once during that stretch. They've also been little threat throwing the football. The Broncos are in the bottom 15 in passing yards, and they're averaging only 18 points a game. Now, weather-wise, probable showers and 42 degrees by game time in Kalamazoo. When it comes to the number, the Broncos saw their last 5 straight stay under the total. Meanwhile, Toledo saw unders against the likes of Ball State, Eastern Michigan, and Central Michigan. I'm going to lean toward Toledo, -7, under 53. Next ball game, Arizona State taking on the Arizona Wildcats, 3 o'clock Eastern start time. The Arizona Wildcats are -4 at home, total 64. And even though the Wildcats did lose a bunch of games, they should be able to throw it all over the yard on Friday. Arizona State has one of the worst secondaries in the Pac-12. And the Wildcats of Arizona, they have a real gunslinger in Jaden DeLaura. The sophomore's thrown for nearly 3,500 yards, and he ranks 5th in the country in passing. He's also going up against an Arizona State defense who ranks 107th in passing yards allowed on the road. Now, as a team, the Sun Devils are on a 3-game skid, and they failed to cover in 7 out of their last 10. When it comes to the weather conditions, dry and warm in Tucson on Friday. Weather should not be a factor. And when it comes to the unless you're not wearing sunblock, maybe you get a little sunburn. That's about it. But anyway, total-wise, the Wildcats saw 5 out of their last 9 get over the line. Meanwhile, Arizona State saw overs against the likes of UCLA, Colorado, and Washington. I'm going to lean toward the Arizona Wildcats, -4, over 64. Next contest, NC State at UNC, 3:30 p.m. East. The North Carolina Tar Heels are -6, totals 56. Now, UNC's throwing for nearly 330 yards, and they rank in the top 15 in scoring. Derek May's thrown for over 3,600 yards and 34 touchdowns. He's 3rd in the nation right now in both of those categories I just mentioned. He's facing an NC State team who's failed to cover in all of their road games this year, and they have a tough time moving the football. These guys are in the bottom 20 in road scoring. Now, weather-wise, probable showers and 59 degrees by game time. Could be a little sloppy, so definitely keep an eye on the radar. When it comes to the total, when it comes to the injury report, wide receiver Antoine Green is questionable to play for the Tar Heels. Conley and Hood are also questionable. And when it comes to the total, oddly enough, UNC did see their last 3 straight stay under the number, 6-3 to the under in their last 9. It ain't for a lack of offense. It's just the markets have been setting the line so high for their games. So plenty of unders for UNC. Now, the Wolfpack on the other side, they saw unders in 5 out of their last 6 themselves. I'm going to lean toward North Carolina. The Tar Heels -6, under 56. Next contest, Arkansas at Missouri, 3:30 Eastern start time. Arkansas is minus 3.5. Totals 55. Now, the Razorbacks are one of the better running teams in the game. They're in the top 5 in road rushing, and they're led by Raheem Sanders, who's rushed for nearly 1,400 yards, along with 10 touchdowns. Now, they're facing a Missouri team who's definitely not built for a track meet. These guys are 98th in passing yards per contest. They also failed to cover here recently against the likes of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. When it comes to the injury report, a handful of guys are questionable to play on Friday for the Tigers. White, Houston, Ndoma, Ogar, Stevens, Cox, and the long snapper. They're all listed as questionable to play. Keep an eye on the long snapper, though. If he doesn't play, that's going to be problems. I'm telling you. College long snapper is very important. Weather-wise, partly cloudy and breezy by game time. When it comes to the total, Missouri saw their last 2 straight get over the number. Arkansas went 70% to the over in their last 10. I'm going to lean toward the Razorbacks, minus 3.5, over 55. All right, next ball game, New Mexico, Colorado State, 3:30 p.m. East. Colorado State is minus 8, total was 35. Now, I don't think the Rams are good enough to lay this many points. They took the loss in their last 4 straight, and they failed to score 17 points in all of those contests. They're also dead last in the nation in points per game. These guys are averaging only 12 points per contest. They're facing a New Mexico squad who actually has a pretty good secondary. I mean, I guess I wouldn't say pretty good, but they do have a serviceable secondary. These guys are actually in the top 20 in the country in fewest passing yards allowed. They've also been catapulted by a pretty tough pass rush. Rico Hanna and Cody Moon, they combined for nearly double-digit sacks between the two of them. When it comes to the weather, beautiful clear skies in Boulder and 55 degrees by game time. That should be a beautiful day to watch a football game. Now, total-wise, the Rams saw all 5 of their home games stay under the line. 10-1 to the under for the whole year. I'm going to lean toward New Mexico plus 8, under 35. Of course, beautiful day like that in Boulder. You guys are high up in the mountains. I'm going to assume a lot of you folks are going to be skiing or snowboarding that day. All right, next, instead of going to a Colorado State game. Anyway, moving on, Big Ten. Nebraska at Iowa, 4 o'clock East. Iowa's minus 10.5, totals 38. And even though the Hawkeyes have one of the worst offenses in the country, I think Nebraska is going to have a tough time moving the football. Aside from losing their last 5 straight, the Cornhuskers, have done very little to establish a run game this year. These guys are 112th in the nation in road rushing. They're also facing an Iowa defense who leads the country in fewest yards allowed per play. Jack Campbell has a team best 107 tackles on the year. When it comes to the secondary, Cooper DeJean and Kayvon Merriweather, they've got 7 interceptions combined. Now, injury-wise, Terry Roberts, Sam Laporta, and Keegan Johnson are questionable for the Hawkeyes. And when it comes to the weather, cold and blustery in Iowa City on Friday. Now, when it comes to the number, the Hawkeyes are 5-1 to the under this year at Kinnick Stadium. No real surprise there. Meanwhile, Nebraska went 80% to the under in their last 10. I'm going to lean toward Iowa, minus 10.5, under 38 in the tight window. That feels like a 13-2 game. Really ugly, low score. All right, next ball game. UCLA, Cal, 4:30 p.m. East. UCLA's minus 10, total 60.5. Now, this does feel like a letdown spot for the Bruins. They lost their last 2 straight to get knocked out of Pac-12 contention. And when it comes to defensive play, the Bruins just can't get off the field. They're in the bottom 10 in defensive time of possession on the road. Of course, offensively, they're just bang, 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 no huddle, quick, up-tempo. That defense is always suffering, always on the field. Now, they're facing a Cal team who actually does a decent job of throwing the football. Jeremiah Hunter and J. Michael Sturdivant, they've combined for nearly 1,500 yards receiving. Meanwhile, as a team, the Golden Bears covered recently against the likes of Stanford, USC, and Washington. Now, injury-wise, Mason Starling's questionable for Cal, Meanwhile, for UCLA, Kaz Allen's questionable for them. When it comes to the weather report, beautiful fall day in Cal Berkeley on Friday. When it comes to the total, Cal saw their last 4 straight get over. UCLA 7-2 to the over in their last 9. I'm going to lean toward Cal plus 10, keeping this one close, over 60.5. Next ball game, Florida at Florida State, 7:30 p.m. East. Florida State's -9 in Tallahassee, totals 58. Now, the Noles have played some really good football down the home stretch. They won their last 4 straight, and they're one of the better covering football teams in the country. They've gone 8-2 against the spread in their last 10. They have arguably the best secondary in the nation. These guys are allowing only 155 yards a game through the air. Meanwhile, when it comes to the pass rush, Jared Verse and Patrick Payton, they've combined for nearly a dozen sacks between the two of them. Now, they're facing a Gator team who's had all kinds of trouble on defense this year. They're allowing a whole bunch of rushing yards on the road, and they're actually in the bottom 5 in defending the pass while traveling. When it comes to the injury report, Xavier Henderson and Arliss Boardingham, they are questionable for the Gators. Ventrell Miller's out for the first half for a targeting call as well. Meanwhile, for Florida State on the other side, Winston Wright and De'Aaron Williamson, they are questionable for the Noles. When it comes to the weather, probably going to be a wet night in Tallahassee. That said, FSU has gone 4-2 to the over in their last 6 at Doak Campbell. Meanwhile, Florida saw overs against the likes of Texas A&M, LSU, and Tennessee. So despite the weather, I think this can still get over the number. I'm going to lean toward Florida State -9 over 58. Next contest, Wyoming at Fresno State, 10 o'clock Eastern kickoff Friday night. Fresno's -15, totals 50. And the Red Hot Bulldogs, they're on a 6-game winning streak. And they're also doing a nice job throwing the football. These guys are in the top 10 in home passing, and they're led by Jalen Moreno-Cropper, who's got just about 1,000 yards receiving on the year. Now, they're facing a Wyoming squad who failed to cover in 3 out of their last 5 on the road. They've also been little threat throwing the football. These guys are currently in the bottom 5 in road passing. Now, when it comes to the weather, partly cloudy and 53 degrees at kickoff. Weather should not be a factor in that one. When it comes to the total, Fresno saw unders against San Jose State, UConn, and USC. Meanwhile, Wyoming saw their last 4 straight stay under the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward Fresno State -15, under 50.